Maria Santos adjusted her worn cleaning supplies cart as she stepped off the service elevator on the 42nd floor of the prestigious Manhattan high-rise. The polished marble floors reflected the morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, creating patterns that reminded her of the stained glass in the small church where she prayed every Sunday. At 34, Maria had been cleaning homes and offices for over 15 years, but the Pierce penthouse was unlike anything she had ever encountered. The apartment sprawled across the entire floor, with rooms that seemed to go on forever. Modern art hung on pristine white walls, and furniture that probably cost more than she made in a year was arranged with museum-like precision. Maria moved quietly through the space, her rubber-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the cold floors. She had learned long ago to make herself invisible in places like this, to clean around the lives of the wealthy without disturbing their perfect worlds. Jonathan Pierce rarely spoke to her during her twice-weekly visits. He was usually locked away in his home office, surrounded by multiple computer screens and talking rapidly into wireless headphones. When their paths did cross, he would offer a polite nod or a brief good morning before disappearing behind another door. Maria knew he was important from the expensive suits that filled his walk-in closet and the business magazines that featured his photographs scattered across his massive dining table. Today felt different though. As Maria dusted the grand piano in the main living area, she could hear raised voices coming from the office. Jonathan's voice carried a sharp edge she had never heard before, punctuated by long silences that suggested he was on a video call. She tried to focus on her work, but the conversation seemed heated, filled with words like acquisition, hostile takeover, and board of directors that painted a picture of corporate warfare. The irony was not lost on Maria. Here was a man who commanded billion-dollar companies and influenced global markets, while she struggled to scrape together enough money to keep her own small world from falling apart. Her 8-year-old son Diego needed surgery to correct a heart defect that had been getting progressively worse. The procedure would cost $47,000, a sum that might as well have been $47 million for all her ability to pay it. Maria had spent the previous evening on the phone with yet another insurance representative, hearing the same cold explanation about coverage limitations and pre-existing conditions. The medical debt from Diego's previous treatments had already forced them to move twice in the past year, each time to smaller, cheaper apartments. Their current one-bedroom unit had water stains on the ceiling and heat that worked sporadically, but it was all she could afford on her combined income from 3 different cleaning jobs. The weight of her situation pressed down on her shoulders as she worked. Diego's cardiologist had been clear that the surgery needed to happen within the next 6 months, or the damage to his heart would become irreversible. The boy who once ran around their neighborhood playground with boundless energy now got winded walking up 2 flights of stairs to their apartment. At night, Maria would lie awake listening to his labored breathing and feel the crushing weight of her inability to fix the one thing that mattered most. She had already borrowed money from everyone she could think of. Her sister Rosa, who worked 2 jobs herself, had given what she could. Her mother, living on a fixed Social Security income, had emptied her meager savings account. The church community had organized a fundraiser that raised $2,000, a generous gesture that was still nowhere near enough. Maria had even swallowed her pride and applied for assistance from several charitable organizations, only to be told she made just enough money to disqualify her from most programs. As she moved through Jonathan's bedroom, straightening already perfect surfaces, Maria caught sight of herself in one of the mirrored walls. Her face looked older than her 34 years, worn down by constant worry and the physical demands of her work. Her hands, once soft, were now rough and often stained from cleaning chemicals. The woman staring back at her seemed like a stranger sometimes, far removed from the young girl who had dreamed of becoming a teacher before life took her down a different path. The sound of Jonathan's office door opening snapped Maria back to the present. She quickly returned her attention to organizing his bookshelf, hoping to finish the section before he emerged. But, instead of leaving for his usual morning departure, she heard his footsteps moving toward the kitchen. This was unusual. Jonathan typically grabbed a protein shake from his refrigerator and left within minutes of her arrival. From the kitchen came the sound of cabinet doors opening and closing, followed by what sounded like frustrated muttering. Maria hesitated, unsure whether she should continue working or make herself scarce. In all her time cleaning the penthouse, she had never seen Jonathan attempt to prepare any food beyond opening a container of something pre-made. The smell of burning reached her nose, followed by the sharp beep of a smoke detector. Without thinking, Maria dropped her cleaning cloth and hurried toward the kitchen. She found Jonathan standing over the stove, staring helplessly at a pan that was producing thick black smoke. He had managed to burn what appeared to be scrambled eggs so thoroughly that they had formed a charcoal-like crust on the bottom of an expensive copper pan. "Mr. Pierce," Maria said softly, moving quickly to turn off the burner and remove the pan from the heat. "Let me help you with that." Jonathan stepped back, looking embarrassed and frustrated. "I can't even make eggs," he said, more to himself than to Maria. "I can negotiate billion-dollar deals, but I can't make simple eggs." Maria had turned on the exhaust fan and opened the window to clear the smoke. She looked at this powerful man who seemed suddenly vulnerable and human in a way she had never witnessed before. "Would you like me to make you some breakfast, Mr. Pierce?" she asked gently. "I have time before I need to start on the bathrooms." He looked surprised by her offer, as if the idea of accepting help with something so basic was foreign to him. "I don't want to impose on your work schedule," he said, but his stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, undermining his polite refusal. Maria smiled, the first genuine smile she had managed in weeks. "It's no trouble at all, sir. My son always tells me I make the best scrambled eggs in the world, though I suspect he's a bit biased." As she began gathering ingredients from his well-stocked but rarely used kitchen, Maria found herself talking about Diego. She described how he loved baseball despite being unable to play, how he collected baseball cards and memorized statistics for players going back decades. She talked about his quick wit and his dream of becoming a sports announcer someday, carefully avoiding any mention of his current health crisis. Jonathan listened with an attention that surprised Maria. He asked questions about Diego's school, his favorite teams, and his other interests. For a few minutes, as Maria prepared a simple but perfectly cooked breakfast, the massive penthouse felt less like a showplace and more like a home where two people were simply having a conversation. But reality crept back in as Maria served Jonathan his eggs and prepared to return to her cleaning duties. The temporary warmth of their interaction couldn't change the fact that she was still a housekeeper with an impossible financial burden, and he was still the billionaire who employed her to maintain his perfect world. The distance between their lives reasserted itself as Jonathan thanked her politely and retreated to his office with his breakfast. Maria spent the rest of the morning working with mechanical efficiency, her mind churning over the brief glimpse of humanity she had seen from her employer. For just a moment, he had seemed like someone who might understand, someone who might care about the struggles of ordinary people. But she pushed those thoughts away. Jonathan Pierce lived in a different universe, one where $47,000 was probably what he spent on a single business dinner. As she prepared to leave, Maria found herself standing outside Jonathan's office door, her hand raised to knock. The sounds from within suggested he was back to his normal routine of rapid-fire phone calls and keyboard clicking. She lowered her hand and turned away, reminding herself that some distances were too great to bridge, no matter how desperate the need or how kind a gesture over breakfast might have been. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual, each floor marking her return to a reality where miracles were in short supply and bills demanded payment regardless of hope or desperation. Maria stepped out into the busy Manhattan street, where the noise and chaos of the city swallowed her small presence immediately. She had 3 more apartments to clean before she could pick up Diego from his after-school program, 3 more perfect homes belonging to people whose biggest worry was probably whether their housekeeper would notice a water ring on an antique table. But, as Maria walked to her next job, something nagged at her about the morning's encounter. For just a moment in that kitchen, Jonathan Pierce had seemed less like an untouchable billionaire and more like a human being who understood what it meant to feel helpless. It was a dangerous thought, one that could lead to false hope and even greater disappointment. Yet she couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had shifted in that brief interaction, something that might matter more than she dared to imagine. 3 days after the breakfast incident, Maria returned to the penthouse for her regular Friday cleaning session. She had spent those intervening days trying to push the memory of Jonathan's unexpected vulnerability out of her mind, but it lingered like an persistent echo. Diego's condition had worsened slightly over the weekend, forcing her to miss several hours of work at another client's home while she took him to an emergency clinic visit that cost $300 they couldn't afford. The penthouse felt different when Maria stepped off the elevator. The usual pristine order seemed disturbed, with papers scattered across the dining room table and what appeared to be the remnants of multiple takeout meals left on various surfaces. Jonathan's normally impeccable living space looked like someone had been camping there for days without pause. As Maria began her work, she could hear Jonathan moving around the apartment more than usual. Instead of being sequestered in his office, he seemed restless, moving from room to room with an energy that felt almost frantic. She found evidence of his sleepless nights everywhere, empty coffee cups abandoned throughout the space, blankets on the living room sofa suggesting he had slept there instead of in his bedroom. When Maria reached the home office to empty the trash, she discovered Jonathan slumped over his desk, apparently asleep among a sea of documents and legal papers. 3 large computer monitors still glowed with complex financial charts and email streams that seemed to refresh every few seconds. She hesitated at the doorway, unsure whether to wake him or simply work around him quietly. The sound of her cleaning cart bumping gently against the doorframe caused Jonathan to jolt awake. He looked around with momentary confusion before his eyes focused on Maria. His usually perfectly styled hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he had been running on very little sleep for quite some time. "Maria," he said, sitting up and attempting to straighten his appearance. "I'm sorry, I must have dozed off." "Don't mind me, please continue with your work." But Maria found herself stepping into the office instead of retreating. Something about his appearance alarmed her. In all the time she had worked for him, she had never seen Jonathan look anything less than completely controlled and professional. "Mr. Pierce, are you feeling all right? You look like you haven't eaten or slept properly in days." Jonathan rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge his exhaustion. "I'm dealing with some challenging business issues," he admitted. "A company I've spent years building is being torn apart by people who see nothing but numbers on a balance sheet. They don't understand what we've created, what it means to the thousands of people who work there." Maria had never heard him speak about his work in personal terms before. Usually, when she overheard his business conversations, they were filled with technical jargon and financial terminology that meant nothing to her. But now he sounded like someone who cared deeply about something being threatened. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It sounds like it's very important to you." Jonathan looked at her with surprise, as if he hadn't expected sympathy from his housekeeper. "It is," he said simply. "More important than I probably should let it be. The company develops medical devices that help children with heart conditions. We've created technology that has saved thousands of young lives, but now a larger corporation wants to acquire us, break us apart, and sell off the profitable pieces while abandoning our research into treatments for rare conditions." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She gripped the handle of her cleaning cart to steady herself, her mind reeling at the impossible coincidence. "Children with heart conditions," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan nodded, then seemed to really look at her for the first time in their conversation. "Maria, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." The room seemed to spin slightly as Maria tried to process what she had just heard. The man who employed her to clean his perfect apartment spent his days trying to save children with heart problems exactly like her son's. The irony was so sharp it almost felt cruel. Here was someone who dedicated his professional life to helping children like Diego, while her own child faced a future limited by the very condition Jonathan's company worked to cure. "My son," Maria began, then stopped. She had maintained professional boundaries for so long that crossing them now felt terrifying. But Diego's increasingly labored breathing during their walk to school that morning had reminded her that time was running out. "My son has a heart condition. He needs surgery, but I can't afford it." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge that could either connect their separate worlds or collapse under the weight of the distance between their circumstances. Jonathan stared at her for a long moment, and Maria could see his mind working, processing this information and its implications. "What kind of heart condition?" he asked, his voice taking on a different quality, more focused and intense. Maria found herself describing Diego's diagnosis in detail, using the medical terms she had learned by heart over years of doctor visits and insurance battles. She explained about the progressive nature of his condition, the timeline for surgery, and the cost that stood between her son and the treatment he needed. The words poured out of her in a rush, as if a dam had finally broken after months of holding everything inside. Jonathan listened without interruption, asking occasional clarifying questions that demonstrated a knowledge of cardiac medicine that went far beyond what most people would possess. When Maria finished speaking, she felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. She had just revealed her deepest vulnerability to someone who held enormous power over her small world. "The device your son would need," Jonathan said slowly, "we manufacture it. It's one of our most successful products. The surgery you're describing, we've helped make it safer and more effective through our technology." The irony twisted deeper. The very company that Jonathan was fighting to save could provide the solution for Diego, but that knowledge only highlighted the impossible gap between need and access. Maria felt tears threatening and struggled to maintain her composure. "I should get back to my work," she said, starting to turn away from the door. "Wait," Jonathan said, standing up from his desk. "I want to understand something. You've been working for me for months, and your son needed this surgery that entire time. Why didn't you ever mention it?" Maria turned back to face him, drawing on reserves of dignity she didn't know she still possessed. "Because you're not responsible for my problems, Mr. Pierce. You pay me fairly to clean your home, and I do the best job I can. What happens in my life outside these walls isn't your concern." "But what if I want it to be my concern?" Jonathan asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities that Maria was afraid to examine too closely. She had spent so long protecting herself from false hope that the idea of accepting help from someone seemed almost dangerous. "I can't ask you for money, Mr. Pierce. It wouldn't be right." "You're not asking," Jonathan said. "I'm offering. Or rather, I'm asking if you would let me help." Maria felt the world shift slightly around her. This conversation was moving into territory she had never imagined, where her carefully maintained boundaries between employer and employee were dissolving into something more complex and human. "I don't understand," she said. Jonathan moved around his desk to face her directly. "My company is fighting for survival because we believe medical technology should serve humanity, not just profit margins. We've spent years developing ways to help children like your son. But what good is all that technology and innovation if it can't help the people right in front of us? Mr. Pierce, I appreciate what you're saying, but I can't accept charity. I have my pride." "It wouldn't be charity," Jonathan said quickly. "It would be an investment. In Diego, in you, in the principle that good people who work hard shouldn't have to watch their children suffer because of money." Maria felt her carefully constructed emotional walls beginning to crumble. For months, she had carried the weight of Diego's situation alone, convinced that his fate rested entirely on her shoulders. The possibility that someone else might care, might be willing to help, was almost too overwhelming to process. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why would you do this for us?" Jonathan was quiet for a moment, looking out the large windows toward the city beyond. "Because this morning, when I couldn't even make breakfast for myself, you helped me without being asked. Because you've worked in my home for months and never once asked for anything beyond your paycheck. Because you raised a son who loves baseball and dreams of being a sports announcer despite facing challenges that would defeat most adults. And because I've spent so much time focused on saving my company that I almost forgot what it was supposed to be for in the first place." Maria felt tears she had been holding back for weeks finally spill over. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Jonathan replied simply. "Let me make some phone calls. Let me use whatever influence I have to get Diego the care he needs. Let me do something that actually matters." The practical part of Maria's mind, the part that had learned to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true, warned her to be cautious. But a larger part, the part that had been drowning in desperation for months, reached out toward this unexpected lifeline. "If you're serious about this," she said slowly, "I would be grateful beyond words. But I want to pay you back, somehow, someway." Jonathan smiled, the first genuine smile Maria had seen from him in all their interactions.
The way you can pay me back is by letting Diego grow up healthy and strong.
Let him become that sports announcer he dreams of being. Let him know that sometimes, when people need help, other people step up to provide it."
Maria nodded, unable to speak through her tears.
The conversation had transformed both of them in ways that neither had anticipated when the morning began. For Maria, it meant hope where there had been only desperation. For Jonathan, it meant reconnecting with the human purpose behind all his corporate maneuvering. As Maria returned to her cleaning duties with a heart that felt lighter than it had in months, she could hear Jonathan making phone calls with a new energy in his voice. He was already working his way through a list of medical contacts, using words like priority case and personal favor in ways that suggested doors were beginning to open. The penthouse felt different now, less like a shrine to wealth and success and more like a place where two people had found an unexpected connection. Maria worked with renewed purpose, knowing that her world was about to change in ways she had never dared to imagine. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to picture Diego running freely, breathing easily, and chasing his dreams without the shadow of illness holding him back. The morning that had begun with exhaustion and despair was transforming into something that resembled a miracle, proving that sometimes the most profound changes in life come not from grand gestures but from simple human moments when one person chooses to see and care about another person's struggle. In the space between Maria's quiet dignity and Jonathan's unexpected compassion, a new story was beginning to write itself.
The following Monday morning arrived with an autumn crispness that made the city feel alive with possibility. Maria stood outside the children's cardiac unit at Mount Sinai Hospital, holding Diego's small hand as they waited for their appointment with Dr. Rebecca Chen, the top pediatric heart surgeon in the region.
3 days had passed since her conversation with Jonathan, and the speed with which things had moved felt almost surreal. Diego squeezed her hand and looked up at her with eyes that held a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. At 8 years old, he was old enough to understand that something important was happening but young enough to trust that his mother would protect him from anything truly frightening. "Mama, why are we seeing a different doctor?" he asked for the third time that morning.
"Remember what I told you, Mijo," Maria said gently, straightening his favorite Yankees jersey.
"Mr. Pierce, the man where Mama works, he knows some doctors who are very good with hearts like yours. Dr. Chen is going to look at all your tests and see how she can help you feel better." Maria still felt like she was living in someone else's life. Jonathan had not only arranged this consultation but had somehow managed to get Diego's entire medical history transferred and reviewed by Dr. Chen's team within 48 hours. When Maria had protested that she couldn't possibly afford such a prominent specialist, Jonathan had simply told her that Dr. Chen was an old friend who owed him a favor from their college days.
The reality was more complex than that simple explanation, as Maria would learn later.
Dr. Chen's groundbreaking research into pediatric cardiac surgery had been funded by grants from Jonathan's foundation for the past 5 years. When he called in his favor, it wasn't just about friendship but about their shared commitment to ensuring that every child had access to the best possible medical care, regardless of their family's financial situation.
Dr. Chen emerged from her office with a warm smile that immediately put Diego at ease.
She was younger than Maria had expected, probably in her early 40s, with kind eyes and an energy that suggested she genuinely enjoyed working with children. "You must be Diego," she said, crouching down to his level. "I've been reading about your heart, and I have to say, you're a very brave young man." Diego straightened his shoulders with pride at being called brave, though Maria could see the nervousness in the way he shifted from foot to foot.
"My mama says you're going to help fix my heart so I can play baseball again," he said.
"Well, let's take a look at everything first," Dr. Chen replied, leading them into her consultation room.
"But I think there's a very good chance we can get you back on that baseball field."
The examination was thorough but gentle, with Dr. Chen explaining each step to Diego in terms he could understand. She listened to his heart through her stethoscope, then let him listen too, pointing out the irregular rhythm that indicated where the problem lay. "Your heart is working extra hard right now," she told him. "It's like trying to pump water through a straw that's too narrow. We want to make that opening bigger so your heart doesn't have to work so hard." As Dr. Chen reviewed Diego's most recent test results on her computer screen, Maria watched her expression carefully for any sign of concern. Instead, she saw concentration and what looked like cautious optimism. The good news, Dr. Chen said, turning back to face them, is that Diego is an excellent candidate for surgery. His overall health is good, and the specific type of defect he has is one that we've had tremendous success treating. Maria felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly knocked her off balance. What kind of success? She asked. With this procedure, we typically see complete resolution of symptoms in about 95% of patients, Dr. Chen explained. Recovery time is usually 4 to 6 weeks, after which Diego should be able to resume all normal activities, including sports. Diego's eyes widened. You mean I can really play baseball again? Like, really? Dr. Chen smiled. Not only play baseball, but probably play it better than you ever have before. Your heart will be working efficiently for the first time in your life. You might be surprised by how much energy you have. The consultation continued with detailed explanations of the procedure, recovery expectations, and post-operative care requirements. Dr. Chen's team would use one of the latest cardiac devices manufactured by Jonathan's company, a minimally invasive solution that would dramatically reduce both the surgical risk and recovery time compared to older methods. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Chen pulled Maria aside while Diego was distracted by a fish tank in the waiting area. I want you to know that Jonathan Pierce is a remarkable man, she said quietly. His foundation has made it possible for our program to treat hundreds of children whose families couldn't otherwise afford care. Diego is fortunate to have someone advocating for him. I still can't quite believe it's really happening, Maria admitted. A week ago, I thought we were out of options. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, Dr. Chen replied. The surgery is scheduled for next Friday. I'll personally be performing the procedure, and I want you to know that Diego will receive the absolute best care we can provide. Meanwhile, across town in his penthouse office, Jonathan was experiencing his own series of revelations. The decision to help Diego had created a ripple effect in his life that went far beyond writing a check for medical expenses. Over the past few days, he had found himself thinking more about the human impact of his business decisions than he had in years. His assistant, Patricia, knocked on his office door and entered with a concerned expression. Jonathan, I have the Henderson Group on line 3. They're pressing for an answer on the buyout offer. Jonathan looked at the blinking phone line and felt a familiar knot of tension in his stomach. The Henderson Group had increased their offer to acquire his company by another $200 million, bringing the total to nearly $3 billion. It was an amount that would set him up for multiple lifetimes of luxury while effectively ending his ability to control how his medical technology was developed and distributed. Tell them I need another week, Jonathan said, surprising both Patricia and himself. Patricia hesitated. Sir, they've made it clear this is their final offer. If you don't accept by Wednesday, they're walking away from the deal entirely. Then, they walk away, Jonathan replied, his voice carrying a conviction he hadn't felt in weeks. Some things are more important than money. After Patricia left, Jonathan sat alone with his thoughts, realizing that his interaction with Maria and Diego had fundamentally changed his perspective on what success actually meant. Building wealth had become such an automatic goal that he had stopped questioning whether the pursuit itself was worthwhile. But, watching Maria's fierce dedication to her son's well-being had reminded him that real achievement came from using whatever resources you had to make life better for others. His phone rang, interrupting his contemplation. The caller ID showed Dr. Chen's number. Rebecca, he answered. How did the consultation go? Beautifully, Dr. Chen replied. Diego is a delightful boy, and he's going to do wonderfully. The surgery is scheduled for Friday morning. I wanted to thank you again for bringing this case to my attention. Actually, I should be thanking you, Jonathan said. This situation has reminded me why we started the foundation in the first place. I've been so focused on corporate battles that I lost sight of our real mission. Speaking of which, Dr. Chen continued, I have an idea I'd like to run by you. What if we created a more formal program for cases like Diego's? Children who fall through the cracks of the insurance system but could benefit enormously from intervention? Jonathan found himself leaning forward with interest. What did you have in mind? A partnership between your foundation and our hospital. We identify children who need cardiac care but can't afford it, and your foundation provides both the funding and the technology. It would be a model program that other hospitals could replicate. The idea energized Jonathan in a way that corporate negotiations hadn't in years.
That's brilliant, Rebecca. How many children are we talking about? Nationally? Probably thousands. Just in our region, we could easily help 50 to 100 children per year. The impact would be enormous, not just medically but socially. Healthy children become productive adults who contribute to their communities. As they discussed the details of such a program, Jonathan felt a sense of purpose returning that had been missing from his work for too long. The corporate buyout battle suddenly seemed less important than building something that would create lasting positive change in the world. That evening, Jonathan made an unexpected decision. Instead of his usual solitary dinner of takeout eaten while reviewing business documents, he found himself walking through his neighborhood, really seeing it for the first time in years. He noticed things that his chauffeured rides had always moved too quickly to register: small family restaurants where people gathered to share meals, playgrounds where children played despite the approaching darkness, elderly couples walking slowly together after decades of partnership. For the first time in memory, Jonathan's enormous apartment felt less like a sanctuary and more like a barrier that separated him from the real life happening all around him. His wealth had insulated him from so many experiences that he was beginning to understand he might have been impoverishing himself in ways that had nothing to do with money. When he returned to the penthouse, Jonathan made another unusual choice. Instead of immediately diving back into work, he called his younger sister Emily, who lived in Seattle with her family. They had spoken only sporadically over the past few years, their conversations usually limited to brief holiday check-ins and birthday acknowledgments. "Jonathan?" Emily answered with surprise. "Is everything all right? You never called during the week." "Everything's fine," he assured her. "I just wanted to talk to you. How are the kids?" They talked for over an hour, with Emily sharing stories about her twin daughter's latest adventures in middle school and her husband's new job teaching high school mathematics. Jonathan found himself genuinely interested in these everyday details of family life that he had always considered too mundane for his attention. "You sound different," Emily observed toward the end of their conversation. "Happier, somehow. What's going on with you?" Jonathan considered how to explain the transformation he was experiencing. "I think I'm remembering what's actually important," he said finally. "It's been a good week for perspective." After hanging up, Jonathan sat in his living room without turning on any lights, watching the city sparkle beyond his windows. Somewhere out there, Maria was probably helping Diego with homework, reading him a bedtime story, and reassuring him about the surgery that would change his life. The thought filled Jonathan with a satisfaction deeper than any business deal had ever provided. The week that had begun with corporate crisis and personal exhaustion was ending with clarity about what he wanted his life to accomplish. Whatever happened with the buyout offer, Jonathan knew that his real work was just beginning. The program he and Dr. Chen had discussed would be only the start of a new chapter focused on using his resources and influence to solve problems that actually mattered. As he finally headed to bed, Jonathan realized that helping Diego had helped him in return. In choosing to see and respond to Maria's situation, he had rediscovered his own capacity for meaningful engagement with the world. The billionaire who had felt trapped in his own success had found a path towards something that might actually deserve to be called a legacy. Friday morning arrived with an unseasonably warm October day that felt like a gift from nature. Maria had barely slept the night before, alternating between prayer and pacing around their small apartment while Diego slept peacefully, unaware of the magnitude of what the day would bring. She had taken the entire week off from her other cleaning jobs, something that would normally have caused financial stress but felt necessary given the circumstances. At 5 a.m, Maria sat at their tiny kitchen table drinking coffee and watching Diego sleep on the pull-out sofa that served as his bed. He looked so small and vulnerable in the early morning light, his breathing still carrying the slight wheeze that had become increasingly noticeable over the past few months. In just a few hours, Dr. Chen would be working to repair the defect that had been quietly stealing Diego's childhood one breath at a time. The phone rang softly, and Maria answered it quickly to avoid waking Diego. To her surprise, it was Jonathan's voice on the other end.
Maria, I hope I'm not calling too early.
I wanted to check how you're feeling about today.
Maria was touched that he had thought to call, especially given that he had already done so much for them. I'm nervous, of course, but Dr. Chen has been wonderful. She called yesterday to go over everything one more time and answer all my questions. I know this probably sometimes the most powerful moments happen when worlds collide in the most unexpected ways.
What happens when desperation meets opportunity? When a single mother working multiple jobs to survive crosses paths with one of the world's wealthiest men? When a simple plea for help becomes the catalyst for something extraordinary?
This is the true story of Maria Santos, a hard-working housekeeper whose life was hanging by a thread, and billionaire tech mogul Jonathan Pierce, whose empire was built on innovation but whose heart had forgotten compassion. Neither knew that a chance encounter in a luxurious penthouse would not only save a family from destruction but would also remind a powerful man of what truly matters in life. In a world where wealth often creates walls between people, this story proves that humanity knows no boundaries. It's about second chances, unexpected kindness, and how one person's courage to ask for help can transform not just their own life, but the life of someone who seemed to have everything. Prepare to witness how a moment of vulnerability became a turning point that neither Maria nor Jonathan could have ever imagined.